Well, welcome back to Living Wisdom, a video series with the goal of providing you hope following a dementia diagnosis. I'm Karsten, alongside Deb Carriveau. I first want to take a moment and say thank you for all the comments that we've gotten on this video series so far. I was telling you that a lot of things, very similar things came out. One, this isn't talked about enough, and people who've had a dementia diagnosis in their family were commenting saying, thank goodness there's actually some information coming out about it. Second, really this 24/7 caregiving experience that is overwhelming and hard, and just everything that you see every day. And again, it just solidifies how important this series is, because we're touching on all these topics.
Yeah, unfortunately, dementia as a topic is just not real openly discussed in the realm of society in general. And it's not an easy journey for anyone. No. And so this really is about trying to give people resources and help and support and education. And, it's kind of like being a parent when you have your first child and there's no handbook that comes with the child. Yeah. And so it's that same kind of devastation that happens with dementia when you kind of hear that and now you're like, holy cow, now what?
Right, exactly. And what comes with that is the topic we're going to talk about today, which is weathering the storm of feelings. You say, ready or not, here they come.
Right. And once you get that diagnosis of dementia, because there's so little really known out there or information that people have access to that's helpful, it is kind of this overwhelming fear about, okay, now what do we do?
Right.
And consequently, there's this whole flood of feelings and emotion that happens when you have a loved one that gets that diagnosis. And there it is. Yeah. You're stuck with it, and it's like, okay, now what do I do with all this kind of thing? And is this normal? People start to question, is how I'm feeling normal? Is there something wrong with me? Am I not a good enough daughter? Am I not a good enough spouse? Because of what they're experiencing emotionally.
Let's talk a little bit about what these feelings are, because it's not just sadness or anger. Really, anything could flood your way with this.
That's absolutely right. So typically, things that are most common and very normal. That's the first thing people need to know. What you're experiencing is absolutely normal. I tell people all the time on this dementia journey, I don't know that there really is a normal in terms of how you experience the journey, but things that are common. Number one is denial. This can't be real. Not my mom, not my dad, not my husband. That's very, very normal. None of us go through life expecting this disease process to knock on our door.
Or any disease, right? It's not going to happen to me.
Exactly right. And lots of times we feel like we've done all the right things in our life to prevent things like this. But the reality is it's there. It's going to happen. Unfortunately, some people will experience it. Some people will not. Yeah. So being in denial initially is a very normal emotion and reaction. Typically, what comes with that is some anger. Why me? Why dad? Why mom? Why my husband? Why my wife? Yeah. And part of that anger and resentment is oftentimes comes with that initial grief about realizing that because of what your loved one's experiencing, now the loss of dreams and plans and things that we were always going to do at this point in time in our life, now the reality is those things are going to be gone or truly different than how you originally planned that to be.
And it's probably two-sided here, right? So it's one, you're scared for what's going to happen to your loved one. And like you said, maybe those plans, but your life has now turned upside down. And I feel like a lot of times when this happens, we're talking sometimes younger parents with young kids, and you already have a lot on your plate. And now it's this, how am I going to juggle it? Like overwhelming, how am I going to do this?
Yes, it's an overwhelming sense of being responsible now. Another big part of what happens emotionally is that it's not unusual for caregivers to be really depressed because it is totally life-changing for you and your loved one. And you have this overwhelming sense of being responsible to make sure your loved one is taken care of. Oftentimes when people get to this point, there's been a lot of history where they've made a commitment or a verbal promise to a loved one that said, I'll never put you in a healthcare facility. I'll never, let somebody else take care of you. I'll keep you at home till you pass away. Whatever those commitments were about initially. Again, those things were made when we thought life and their course was going to be normal,
right,
if you will. And we were going to be able to make that happen. Now the reality sitting in front of you is that may not be possible. As much as we want to, oftentimes, we just can't provide as individuals everything that your loved one may necessarily need on this journey. The other thing that's a big reality for people is just this overwhelming sense of just being guilty about the way you feel. You're like, this is my mom. She loves me. She took care of me my whole life. How can I possibly feel, any kind of resentment or anger about what she's experiencing? But again, that is normal to feel that. It's okay to understand and realize you may not be able to be all things to your loved one. No one can. That's not humanly possible. I tell caregivers all the time when I'm working with families, just by the nature of this illness and this disease journey, you guys are trying to do with one or two people at home what it takes 30 of us around the clock to do professionally. So sometimes the reality in front of us is that your loved one just needs more than you can provide as they go on this journey, and that's okay. That doesn't make you a bad daughter, a bad spouse, doesn't make you inadequate in any way.
That's hard. But when you think about what your loved one needs, because as we've talked about with this disease as well, if the individuals aren't getting that stimulation they need, it progresses faster.
That's correct.
So I think that's important to remember too. It's hard to think about, okay, I'm not going to be the one taking care of my parent, but at what point do you have to say what's going to help them more with this disease? What's going to give me more time with my loved one as well?
And we'll talk about that in more detail in a future episode, but absolutely it's understanding that there'll come a time in this journey when you have to set aside what you feel and really take a look at the reality in front of you about what is it that's most therapeutic or most needed for my loved one at this point in time, in terms of how can I do my very best or provide the very best for my loved one to have the best quality of life through this process, and that's difficult.
So all these feelings are normal. So whatever you're feeling, you got to own that and understand that that's okay. But you do have to understand where that's coming from, right? So you say that everything is coming out different: anger, sadness, frustration, grief. You got to dive a little bit into why you're feeling that, right? Before you ultimately get to this period of acceptance, which is the ultimate goal, right? So what can I do to almost investigate that? Is it just kind of going to therapy, finding someone to talk to? What do I do?
So first thing you need to do is kind of acknowledge for yourself and identify for yourself, what is this feeling I'm having? And then try to help yourself understand where that's coming from, and that it's perfectly normal for what you're experiencing. So for example, it's very normal for people to be grieving, to feel like they've almost had a death of a loved one when they start this journey, because the reality that's out there is your loved one is going to change. Okay, so the mom or dad or spouse that you have always known and loved, there's a piece of this journey where it feels very much like a different person now occupies your loved one's body.
Yeah.
Just because of the way the brain changes, the way personality changes. So we talk about dementia in general being a disease process that is something where people experience this constant, perpetual grieving process from the time you receive a diagnosis until actually there's a physical death of the loved one. So sometimes that can be 5 to 7 years that you're in the midst of that journey. That's a long time
really
to
hard.
grieve.
Yeah.
Loneliness is a very common experience, again, because you're watching your loved one who you've always been connected to.
Your best buddy, right? That you're losing.
Your best friend. That you have always known to be a certain way. Now that person is changing. So that means your relationship and how you relate to that person also changes.
Okay.
It's not that you don't love your loved one anymore or they don't love you. It's just their ability to express it and connect to you the way they have in the past changes.
It's different, and it's hard to remember that. It's hard to remember that they're still feeling, that they're still loving. They're just showing it in a different way, and that's really hard.
And a lot of times the anger that people feel really is about, the resentment that this is going to change our lives, the way we planned our lives, the way we always pictured our lives to be.
Yeah.
And there's also, it's so easy on this journey for us to confuse being angry at the disease versus angry at the person.
Yeah.
And, so it's really important that people understand and acknowledge for themselves. It's okay to feel what you feel, but understand it's about the disease and not about the person.
Yeah.
Oftentimes what we experience on this journey with a loved one feels like our loved one is doing or saying things that are very intentional or hurtful. And in reality, that's not what it's about. It's about their disease process and the fact they have no ability to change how they perceive things or to change how they express things because of changes that are organically happening to their brain.
And I think you were saying, so kind of journaling is an option, talking to people. So how do you work through that? What are some things that you would suggest?
So one of the things is to not pent up your feelings.
Gotcha.
We have a tendency to go, oh, this doesn't feel good, so therefore I better not share it and just keep it to myself because I'm embarrassed and I don't want people to know that I'm angry at my husband or that I'm, angry at God. And so we don't talk about those things. And so the worst thing you can do is to not express it. If we keep it pent up, then it has a tendency to build what I call an emotional sludge, if you will, where things just get ugly and dark and resentment builds and anger builds. And unless you're able to vent that and release that, lots of times the way we see that express itself is in the way we care for that loved one.
Makes sense.
And it's directed toward them. Not with intent, but that's just by human nature what happens if we don't allow ourselves to vent and express what we feel. It's extremely important that you acknowledge it in a way that is comfortable for you to do that. So it may be talking to a pastor. It may be talking to a professional counselor. It may be sitting down with a good, trusted friend and just saying, listen, I gotta get this off my chest. I gotta tell you how I feel. It's okay just to sit down and have a good therapeutic cry. There's nothing wrong with that. That's very, very normal and healthy to do that. Lots of people find relief and the ability to be free and open with their feelings if they journal. That can be a very therapeutic process. I tell people to carry a journal with you at all times. Keep one at your bedside. Keep one in your purse. You never know when those unexpected feelings are going to surface.
Right.
And it's important that in that moment you acknowledge what that is. You're able to get it out on paper, make it concrete so you can see it, you can acknowledge it, you can own it, And then you can ask the question, what am I going to do with this?
Gotcha. Because ultimately acceptance is what is going to allow your significant other that you're caring for to thrive and for you to really work through this.
Absolutely.
And again, we talk about this as it's a change in your life. And once you get through these feelings, easier said than done. Do not get me wrong. But once you work through that and really get through the bottom of it, you can still love your loved one. You can still have this life together,
That's
right?
Exactly
so
right.
It almost feels like you gotta put in the work. So when you reach the level of acceptance, you can really enjoy that time you have left with your loved one. Because as you said, 5 to 7 years, that's a long time.
That is a long time.
And that's not even, right, that's just general, not a specific.
Could be as long as 10 years. It just depends.
So you gotta, is that really where you gotta get the acceptance so you can live the rest of that life together?
If you aren't able to acknowledge and own how you feel about this journey and the process and how it's impacting your loved one, all of that negative pent-up stuff gets in the way of you and your loved one being able to really create moments of joy and to embrace the reality in front of you about how do we move forward and still have quality of life. Although dementia is a terminal illness, there's lots of time that your loved one has left to live that can still have good quality, great moments of joy, great moments of connection. People need to embrace the fact that although what you see externally looks like your loved one is someone different, each one of us still hold whatever our core personhood is.
Yeah.
And a big part of what caregivers and families need to learn on this journey is, how do I help myself and my loved one reconnect to that core personhood that they have always been? And again, through that process, it will change how you connect. It will change how you relate, but you will still love. You will still connect. You will still have moments of joy. You will still have quality of life. It's just a matter of reaching out and allowing people to help you and support you to understand, how do I be that bridge? How do I reconnect myself and my loved one to that person they have always been? And what does that look like with dementia?
And as you're kind of going through these feelings, it's great opportunity to talk about support and education. There is stuff out there besides this, which is why we're doing this, but talk to me a little bit about that support, that education, that help that these families can get.
So there's multiple different kinds of things that people can take advantage of. One is, I would encourage people to get into some kind of a caregiver support group. We have those here at the Living Wisdom Center at Hubbard Hill. That's open community-wide. It doesn't have to be individuals living on this campus. There's Alzheimer's and Dementia Services out of South Bend, which is our local regional agency, who provides all kinds of caregiver support groups all over the counties of our area. There is the Alzheimer's Association, who also provides those support groups. There is I'm going to make a reference to a resource that I really like. There is a book called Caregivers Share Stories, support group in a book. That's what it's called.
Nice.
And so you can also just read about people's experiences. You can Google dementia on the web and find all kinds of information. The only thing I would really encourage people to do is ensure that when you're researching and you're reaching out and you're looking for education and information, make sure that you're talking to or working with people who have been deemed as experts, who you know have a foundational knowledge base, who's going to give you good information.
Right.
The other thing I would encourage people to do is, if you get information and you don't feel like it's reliable, you don't know if you can count on this to be accurate or not, then reach out to myself, reach out to one of those national agencies I just mentioned. They will give you good information, and if they don't have it, they'll find it for you, and they'll send you to who does.
Listen, I love a good internet search, but it gives me a lot of stress, right?
Absolutely.
Because you go down a rabbit hole and then it's
Yeah.
not even what you need, especially with my kid, right? If she eats something, I just go straight to like that hotline that tells me whether or not we go to the emergency room. Go to the experts, relieve that stress. It's sometimes scary to make the phone call because you may not want to know the answer, but do it. Deb, this is so important to just acknowledge that. I love that you said whatever you're feeling is normal. We just got to talk about it.
Absolutely.
And
just don't keep it in and share it. Help. Reach out and let somebody help you through this. This is not a journey that you can do or be successful alone.